At her own reception, they moved Amara's chair away from the family table
Welcome,
and gave the
Amara.
place of honor to the woman her husband once promised he had forgotten. Not quietly,
Amara's
not
place
respectfully,
is not here. Why are you
and
doing
not
this?
by mistake.
This is our wedding!
The hall was
Tradition
full of
demands
light,
respect.
polished glass, and expensive laughter. A live band was midway
could
through a
you?
love song.
Amara,
Waiters
I'm
in
so
black
sorry.
uniforms were gliding between
This is the
tables
way
with
it
silver
must be.
trays. Guests were raising phones, smiling toward the floral stage, ready to capture what was supposed to be the most beautiful night of Amara Okoye's life. Then, Chief Mrs. Balogun reached down, lifted the name card that had been resting on Amara's chair, and placed it aside as if it meant nothing. "Ashake should sit here," she said, her voice smooth and certain. "She knows this family better." For one long second, nobody moved. Amara stood in her ivory reception gown beneath the chandelier, one hand lightly resting against her waist, the other holding a bouquet she no longer felt. Her husband, Tunde Balogun, looked first at his mother, then at Ashake, then finally at Amara, and said nothing. That silence cut deeper than the insult itself. It would have been easier if someone had shouted. It would have been easier if there had been an argument, a confession, a scene ugly enough to make the cruelty obvious. But this was polished cruelty, the kind that hides behind tone, behind smiles, behind a wealthy family's belief that if something is done elegantly, it is no longer wicked. Ashake lowered herself into the seat with the calm confidence of someone who had not been surprised by the invitation. Her dress was a deep green silk that caught the light every time she shifted. Her wrists glittered. Her smile never fully arrived, but it hovered at the edge of her mouth like a private victory. A few guests exchanged glances. Someone at the back whispered, "So that's the real woman." Someone else said, "Then why did he marry the other one?" Amara heard both. She heard the scrape of the chair. She heard the band falter for half a beat before recovering. She heard one of the photographers lower his camera, uncertain whether this was drama or some strange family joke. But louder than all of that was the silence of the man who had just become her husband. Tunde had spent 2 years telling her she was peace. He had told her she was different from the women who chased noise. He had said her softness made him feel safe. He had said she was the first person who saw him without being impressed by his family's money. Now, beneath crystal light and imported roses, he let another woman take her place. Amara did not cry. That was what they were waiting for. The shaking lip, the ruined makeup, the anger they could later describe as instability. The moment that would let everybody go home and say, yes, the family may have gone too far, but the bride was also dramatic. She gave them none of it. Instead, she placed her bouquet on the sweetheart table. Then she slid her wedding band off her finger. Not with rage, not with trembling hands, just quietly, carefully, as if she were removing the final piece of a costume that no longer fit. For 1 second, she looked at the ring resting beside the flowers. Then Amara turned and walked away from her own reception. No one stopped her. Not Tunde, not his mother, not the women who had spent the day complimenting her beauty, not the men who claimed to respect dignity. The doors of the ballroom opened, and the humid Lagos night swallowed her whole. Outside, the city glowed beyond the hotel gates. Victoria Island traffic hummed in the distance. A fountain near the entrance spilled water over black stone. The valet boys stood straighter when they saw a bride walking out alone. Amara stepped down the marble stairs slowly, gathering the hem of her dress in one hand. Against her collarbone, hidden beneath the beading of the gown, rested a small bronze key on a thin chain. Inside a stitched pocket near her ribs was a sealed document in a cream envelope. She had carried both all day. She had not planned to touch either of them that night, but life has a way of choosing the hour when old truths become necessary. A hotel attendant approached carefully and asked whether she wanted the car brought around. Amara looked past him toward the glass entrance, where silhouettes still moved behind gold curtains. "Yes," she said after a moment, "but not yet." She sat on the edge of the fountain and let the air settle around her. Her breathing slowed. Her shoulders straightened. Inside, people were already rewriting what had happened. Chief Mrs. Balogun would be smoothing it into a misunderstanding. Ashake would be pretending she never meant to offend anyone. Tunde would be telling himself he could explain it later. Later. People always promise later when they lack the courage to do the right thing now. Amara took the cream envelope from its hidden pocket. Her name was written across the front in old, deliberate handwriting. Amara Nkem Okoye. She knew that handwriting. It belonged to the woman who had raised her, Mamaeze, the only person who had ever looked at Amara and spoken to her as if quietness were not a weakness, but a discipline. Amara had grown up in a modest house in Enugu, where the walls held heat through the dry season and the backyard smelled of rain-soaked earth every August. Mamaeze used to tell her two things over and over again. Never fight to be chosen where you are merely being tolerated, and never confuse softness with lack. At 17, Amara had been given the bronze key and told that one day it would open what belonged to her, but only when life made the lesson necessary. At that age, she had rolled her eyes. Teenage girls do not understand why older women speak in riddles. They think wisdom should arrive as explanation. They do not yet know that some truths must wait for pain to become visible. When Mamaeze died, Amara took the locked teak box she had left behind and stored it away untouched. University came, work came, Lagos came. Life became bills, traffic, deadlines, and the tired kind of hope worn by people building themselves without the help of old money. She studied urban planning because she believed a city revealed its morality in the way it housed ordinary people. She joined a non-profit that fought displacement in low-income neighborhoods. She learned how quickly land could become power, and how often power learned to speak politely while crushing people beneath it. That was where Tunde first saw her, at a development fundraiser in Ikoyi. The Baloguns had sponsored the event. Their name was on the backdrop. Their company owned dealerships, logistics yards, luxury apartments, and half the political friendships that mattered in Lagos. Tunde moved through the room with the ease of a man raised to believe every door would open for him before he reached it. He was handsome in a practiced way. Tall, composed, always one step ahead of the room's laughter. His suits fit too well. His charm had timing. He noticed Amara because she was the only woman there not trying to be noticed. She was at the edge of the venue, adjusting a crooked donor placard no one else had bothered to straighten. "You look like the only honest person in this room," he said. Amara glanced at him and replied, "That sounds less like a compliment and more like an accusation." He laughed. It worked. Not all at once, but steadily. Flowers to the office, coffee on difficult mornings, calls that felt thoughtful, dinners where he asked about her work and seemed to remember everything. He told her he liked that she did not perform. He told her she made the world feel less noisy. Amara had not grown up being pursued extravagantly. She had not been one of those women men made spectacles over. Tunde's attention felt intentional, measured, safe. That mattered. His mother did not matter at first. Chief Mrs. Balogun was the kind of woman Lagos society admired publicly and feared privately. She chaired foundations, hosted women's conferences, funded scholarships, and spoke often about family values in a voice that suggested she believed herself the final authority on all things refined. She accepted Amara early on because Amara seemed manageable, educated, polite, without a loud family, without visible ambitions to enter society circles. The kind of woman a powerful family believes it can absorb. Then she realized Tunde loved her seriously. That changed everything. Criticism became subtle at first. Amara's work was called noble but small. Her wardrobe was called simple, in tones that meant insufficiently luxurious. Her quietness became hard to read. At one dinner, Chief Mrs. Balogun referred to the women in their circle as those raised for rooms that matter, then smiled at Amara as though generosity had been shown. Tunde apologized every time, and changed nothing. That became the pattern. He would kiss her forehead afterward and say, "You know how my mother is," as if a repeated wound became harmless once it was predictable, as if refusing to confront disrespect was not a form of agreement. Still, Amara stayed, because love can make decent women explain away what clearer women would leave. Because sometimes the thing you hope for most is simply for the person you love to become brave in time. 6 months before the wedding, Amara almost opened the teak box. A leak in her apartment forced her to move things from the top shelf. The bronze keys slipped from an old pouch and landed at her feet. She stared at it for a long time. But Tunde called that evening, excited about venues and guest counts and honeymoon plans. He sounded so sure of their future that she put the key away again. After the wedding, she told herself, after life settled, after she became officially safe. How many people have ruined themselves by postponing truth until after a ceremony? Sitting by the fountain in her reception gown, Amara finally broke the envelope seal. Inside was a short note in Mamaeze's handwriting and a card with a law office number printed in dark ink. The note read, "If you are holding this tonight, then somebody has finally shown you the measure of their heart. Do not beg to remain where God is exposing what never deserved you. Call Mr. Afolayan. Open the box. Sign nothing in sorrow." Amara read it twice. Then a third time. She stood, asked the attendant for a private room, and within 15 minutes she was in a quiet executive lounge on the mezzanine floor of the same hotel where her reception continued without her. Her gown was still immaculate. Her face was still composed. Only her eyes had changed. The teak box was brought from her car. She unlocked it with the bronze key. Inside was a stack of sealed documents, a photograph of a man standing near Lagos Harbor in a Navy caftan, and an embossed folder carrying the name of one of the oldest commercial law firms in the country. The man in the photograph had her eyes, or rather, she had his. Amara had known very little about her father, only that he had died when she was young, only that adults grew careful when his name entered a conversation, only that Mamaeze used to say, "Some men build loudly, yours built quietly." Her hands did not shake when she dialed the number. The receptionist answered with professional calm. But the moment Amara gave her full name, the energy on the line shifted. She was transferred immediately. "Amara Okoye?" a deep voice asked. "Yes." A pause. Then, "I have waited many years for this call." The man's name was Kunle Afolayan. He said he was already nearby and would come in person. He arrived less than an hour later, silver-haired, broad-shouldered, wearing the expression of someone accustomed to handling truths too heavy for carelessness. He looked first at her gown, then at the unopened champagne the lounge attendant had left untouched, then at the documents spread between them. "You look exactly like your father when he had made a decision," he said. Amara did not know what to do with that sentence, so she said nothing. Mr. Afolayan opened the file, and with the quiet efficiency of a man who respected evidence more than drama, he changed the architecture of her life. Her father, Chika Okoye, had not been merely successful. He had been one of the hidden early investors behind a network of waterfront, logistics, and redevelopment holdings stretching from Lagos to Port Harcourt and onward through coastal trade corridors. He avoided publicity. He used layered corporate structures. He trusted paper, patience, and privacy more than attention. When enemies, opportunists, and even distant relatives began circling his wealth after Amara's mother died, he placed his daughter's inheritance behind trust protections that could not be accessed until a triggering event made clear she was emotionally old enough to withstand the world attached to it. "What triggering event?" Amara asked. Mr. Afolayan met her gaze. "An act of public betrayal, severe enough to expose the character of anyone asking for your lifelong trust." Amara sat back slowly. The hotel beneath them stood on land controlled by one of those trust entities. So did the Balogun family's flagship luxury auto complex in Lekki. So did 2 bonded warehouses tied to their logistics arm. So did the conference center, where Chief Mrs. Balogun hosted her Women's Leadership Foundation Gala every year. Amara looked at the papers, then up at the lawyer. "You're telling me this family has been building its image on property linked to my father?" He nodded once. "I am telling you they have mistaken access for ownership." No thunder cracked. No orchestra swelled. No one burst into the room. The most life-changing moments rarely arrive with the theatrics people imagine. Sometimes they arrive in silence, in leather folders, in signatures waiting beside your own name. Mr. Afolayan placed one document in front of her. It was an activation order. If she signed, management authority would pass fully into her hands as principal beneficiary of the Okoye Coastal Trust. Amara stared at the line for her signature. Below, her reception was still happening. People were still eating, still gossiping, still assuming she had been reduced. "How much would this destroy them?" she asked quietly. Mr. Afolayan answered with care. "That depends on whether you want destruction or correction." Amara thought about Tunde's silence. She thought about his mother's hand lifting her place card. She thought about Asake sitting where the bride belonged. Then she thought about Mamaeze's note. "Sign nothing in sorrow." She withdrew her hand. "Not tonight," she said. Mr. Afolayan studied her for a moment, then gave a small, approving nod. "Good," he said. "Grief makes poor executives." That night, Amara did not return to the reception. She went home. She slept for less than 2 hours. And by sunrise, she had already begun reading. For 3 days, she met with trust administrators, auditors, property counsel, and operations managers who had served the Okoye structures for years without ever meeting the daughter of the man who created them. She learned that her father had not merely accumulated wealth. He had designed leverage. Long leases, protective clauses, renewal conditions, governance triggers. Community covenants most landlords would have stripped away if profit were the only goal. More surprising than the money was the philosophy behind it. School clinics had been quietly funded through shell philanthropy. Medical debt had been retired anonymously. Women's cooperatives had been financed in river communities no politician ever visited unless elections were near. Her father had hidden generosity inside systems because he believed public charity was too often just vanity and expensive clothes. That mattered to Amara more than the numbers, though the numbers were enormous. By the second week, Tunde had left her 11 voicemails. The first few were apologetic, then wounded, then slightly angry, in the selfish way some men become angry when your silence denies them the emotional stage on which they hope to repair themselves. Please let me explain. My mother was wrong, but you know how she is. You embarrassed me by leaving. Amara, this is getting bigger than it needs to. He still did not understand. She had not made it bigger. He had merely not grasped how small he had been, standing beside what he betrayed. Chief Mrs. Balogun sent 2 messages through mutual acquaintances requesting a private conversation between women. Amara declined both. Not every conversation deserves your presence, especially not those held merely to preserve the pride of the cruel. 3 weeks later, the Baloguns proceeded with their annual foundation banquet. It was held, as always, in the Harbor Conference Hall, under one of the trust-linked hospitality agreements now under review. Canceling it would have drawn attention, and families like the Balogans believe composure is stronger than consequence. So the event continued. Black cars lined the entrance. The press cameras flashed. Women in gele and diamonds floated through the lobby like prestige had become fabric. Chief Mrs. Balogun took the stage in bronze lace and old certainty. Tunde sat at the front looking thinner. Ashake was nowhere to be seen. Then Amara arrived. She did not come dressed for battle. That would have been too obvious. She wore a tailored black dress with long sleeves, simple gold earrings, and the bronze key resting openly at her collarbone. No diamonds, no noise. Mr. Afolayan walked beside her, carrying a slim folder. The first person to notice her was the general manager. He crossed the room immediately. Not because she was a bride, not because she was scandal, because someone had finally informed him whose signature now mattered. That movement started the whispers. Chief Mrs. Balogun saw her from the podium and faltered for the first time in public memory. Tunde pushed his chair back too quickly. Every eye in the room shifted. Amara kept walking until she reached the center aisle beneath the chandeliers. Chief Mrs. Balogun forced a smile. "Amara," she said into the microphone, "this is hardly the appropriate moment." Amara did not ask for the microphone. She simply waited until the room became quiet enough to hear the truth. Then Mr. Afolayan handed the legal packet first to the venue manager, then to the Balogun Company Council, then to the foundation's event coordinator. Amara spoke clearly. "My name is Amara Nkem Okoye, acting principal of the Okoye Coastal Trust. Effective immediately, all trust-linked hospitality privileges, venue preferences, and legacy lease concessions attached to Balogun entities are under executive review." There was no shouting. That was what made it worse. Or better, depending on which side of power a person had built their confidence. Chief Mrs. Balogun stepped away from the podium. "This is outrageous," she snapped, forgetting her microphone was still live. A soft wave passed through the room. Amara turned toward her. "What was outrageous," she said, "was removing a bride from her own seat to honor the woman who helped humiliate her and expecting dignity to remain silent for the comfort of your guests." Nobody laughed. Nobody moved. Tunde stared at her as if he were seeing her for the first time. Perhaps he was. Some men only begin to perceive a woman's full shape after they can no longer control where she stands. Chief Mrs. Balogun tried to recover her poise. "If this is about emotion..." Amara stopped her with one lifted hand. "No. Emotion is what you counted on. Documentation is what arrived instead." Even Mr. Afolayan glanced sideways at her then, as if appreciating the precision. Amara did not list every insult. She did not recite every warning sign she had once forgiven. She did not narrate the architecture of disrespect the Balogans had hidden beneath etiquette and wealth. She did not need to. Power rarely improves when it begins performing. At a side table near the stage, she signed the formal notice authorizing review of preferential leases, event privileges, and hospitality concessions. That signature was neat, steady, unhurried. The room watched the pen move, and in that moment, a wealthy family discovered that humiliation is easy when the victim has no leverage, but terrifying when the woman you tried to reduce was quietly holding the paper beneath your empire. Amara set the pen down. Then she left, again. But this time, nobody mistook her exit for defeat. The aftermath was not dramatic in the way gossip prefers. It was structural. Rates were reassessed to current market value. Preferential venue access was suspended pending compliance review. 2 Balogun logistics properties were found to be overextended under revised lease conditions. Bank discussions slowed. Investors became cautious. Friends who once returned calls in 5 minutes began asking for emailed summaries and later appointments. Chief Mrs. Balogun discovered something ugly about high society. It worships confidence only while confidence remains expensive. The moment consequence appears, elegance becomes lonely. Tunde came to see Amara 6 weeks later, not at the trust office, at the non-profit office where she still worked. Because contrary to everything his family believed about power, she had not abandoned the work that made her who she was before any inheritance was activated. She had expanded it, quietly. The trust was now financing tenant legal aid, women-led rebuilding cooperatives, drainage repairs in flood-prone communities, and micro-grants for market widows displaced by redevelopment. Amara insisted on anonymity whenever possible. She had seen enough of public generosity used as branding. When Tunde entered, he looked older. Not in years, in certainty. His confidence had lost its polish. Men raised inside constant approval often appear unfinished when approval finally leaves them alone with themselves. He sat only after she indicated a chair. For a while, he said nothing. Then, "I didn't know." Amara nodded. "That part is true." He lifted his head, hopeful that truth might save him. "If I had known who you were..." She cut in gently. "That is not the defense you think it is." He fell silent. Rain tapped lightly against the office window. At last, he said, "I loved you." Amara looked at him for a long moment. Then she answered with the kind of calm that leaves no room for manipulation. "Maybe in the way you were capable of loving me then, but not in the way that protects a person when protection costs comfort." He looked down at his hands. There are sentences people remember for the rest of their lives, not because they are loud, but because they arrive without mercy and without cruelty, which is somehow harder to resist. He asked whether she had ever planned to tell him about the trust. Amara thought of the teak box, of Mamaeze, of the future she had once imagined sharing with a husband brave enough to deserve all of her truth. "I planned to tell the man I married," she said. "You never became him." He had no answer. Before he left, he apologized again. This time, it was sincere. But sincerity arriving after ruin does not become restoration simply because the voice shakes. Amara wished him peace, not because he had earned softness from her, because bitterness is costly, and she had inherited too much clarity to keep paying for pain that no longer owned her. Chief Mrs. Balogun never apologized. She sent one final invitation through a family friend, asking for a dignified closing conversation. Amara ignored it. Some people do not want forgiveness. They want access to the version of themselves that still looked graceful before they were exposed. Ashake disappeared from the family's orbit almost immediately. Rumor placed her in Abuja, then Accra, then nowhere anyone could verify. Amara did not follow. People who survive by attaching themselves to unstable power rarely stay long enough to watch the dust settle. Months passed. The city moved. The harbor still glittered. The Baloguns remained wealthy, but not unquestioned. That was enough. Amara had not wanted collapse. She had wanted correction. And correction, when done well, has more dignity than revenge. By the following dry season, she restored Mamaeze's old house in Enugu, not into a museum, into a center. The front room became a reading space for girls after school. The side compound became a small enterprise lab where widows and young mothers learned bookkeeping, food processing, tailoring, and digital sales. A shaded veranda became the meeting place for women's land rights clinics funded through trust grants. She called it the Nkem House Initiative. No press conference, no ribbon cutting, just work. That, more than anything, would have made her father proud. Over time, Mr. Afolayan brought her old letters. Not many, just enough. In them, Chika Okoye wrote about land parcels, legal safeguards, and community protections. But between those lines were quieter things. One note described baby Amara gripping his thumb with shocking strength. Another said she stopped crying whenever someone sang softly in Igbo near her cradle. Another read, "If she ever mistakes stillness for smallness, remind her she comes from builders, not beggars." Amara kept that line in her wallet. It steadied her on difficult days. And there were difficult days. Because revelation does not erase humiliation. Even when the balance of power changes, the body remembers. There were nights she woke, hearing again the scrape of the chair at her reception. Days when she remembered the guests, watching to see how broken she would become. Healing was not instant. But now, when those memories came, another image answered them. Mamaeze in the courtyard at dusk, hands dusted with flour, voice calm, telling her never to chase acceptance into rooms that had already decided her value. A year later, Amara was invited to a civic development dinner, honoring anonymous contributions to equitable housing reform. Her name had been submitted by 3 separate organizations. This time, she accepted. Not because she needed applause, because sometimes visibility can be used responsibly when it points attention toward work larger than ego. She wore midnight blue, simple earrings, no theatrics. When she stood to speak, the room listened. Her speech was brief. She talked about land as memory, about women who build stability without ever being photographed beside it, about the difference between being visible and being valuable. At the back of the hall, unnoticed by almost everyone, Tunde listened. He did not approach her afterward. That may have been the first truly loving thing he ever did. He allowed her future to remain unentered by his regret. Later that night, Amara drove alone to the waterfront where Lagos light met black water, and the wind carried salt and diesel and distance. She thought about the reception, about the chair, about the ring, about the way one terrible night had cracked open an inheritance far larger than money. Because what had truly changed her life was not wealth. It was discernment. The ability to tell the difference between being loved and being accommodated, between being admired privately and defended publicly, between a man who calls you peace and a man who protects your peace when it costs him something. She took the wedding band from the small pouch where it had remained untouched for a year, held it up once against the city lights, then put it away for the last time. No ceremony, no tears. Not every ending needs spectacle. Some things simply stop belonging to you. On the second anniversary of Nkem House, the rooms were full. Girls bent over homework. Older women passed tea around the veranda. A legal volunteer explained inheritance rights to 3 market traders who had never been told they were entitled to any claim at all. Laughter drifted from the kitchen. A little girl with neat braids looked up from her exercise book and asked, "Auntie Amara, were you always rich?" The room went quiet in that amused, startled way rooms do when children accidentally place their hand directly on truth. Amara smiled. "No," she said. "I was always valuable. I just didn't know everything that belonged to me yet." The women laughed softly, but 1 or 2 of them looked at her in a deeper way, because they understood she was not speaking only about property. That evening, after everyone left, Amara sat alone on the veranda. The bronze key rested warm against her skin. It no longer represented mystery, only memory. People had mistaken her politeness for surrender. They had mistaken her calm for weakness. They had looked at a woman who did not announce herself loudly and assumed there could not possibly be power inside her. They were wrong. Strength does not always enter a room like thunder. Sometimes it sits quietly through the insult. Sometimes it walks out before dignity is forced to kneel. Sometimes it waits, reads every page, learns every clause, and signs only when the heart is no longer bleeding. They seated his ex at her reception because they believed public humiliation could lower her worth. But her worth had never been in the chair. Not in the ring. Not in the Balogun name. Not in the chandeliers, the photographers, the social approval, or the shallow respect of people who confuse class with character. Her worth had been waiting much earlier. In a bronze key. In an old woman's wisdom. In a father's private architecture. In the version of herself that chose clarity over chaos. That was the real inheritance. Not simply land. Not merely money. Not leases and trusts and holdings heavy enough to alter a skyline. The real inheritance was judgment. The courage to leave a room that required your humiliation to maintain its comfort. The discipline to answer cruelty without becoming cruel. The wisdom to understand that sometimes God allows disrespect to become visible, so you will finally stop negotiating with what was never meant to keep you. If this story proves anything, it is something simple. The people who disrespect you are not qualified to measure you. And sometimes the quietest person in the room is carrying the future everybody else is too arrogant to imagine. All it takes is one revealed truth, one steady hand, one final signature, and everything changes.